Indiminwalish, good afternoon, everyone. This is part two of the things I love about Ethiopia. On part one, I left off at this church of St. George, which is called Bet Georgis, which is one of the more beautiful churches that you see, which was carved out of solid volcano rock and actually one of the more newer churches that were built. The church grounds are accessed via a descending trench and tunnel, which allows access to a sunken courtyard surrounding the building. And as you can see within that portion, it allows people to travel towards the small baptismal pool, which you can see with the green leaves on top. My tour guide mentioned to me that the green leaves are there to prevent the growth of algae and bacteria. I'm not sure how well it does it, but they cover it for a reason. They consider it holy water below. So other than that, it was a great tour for that particular church. I love the architecture. It was solid, and I'm so happy to have been to that because the amount of people that were there that was holding pilgrimage there, it was a sight to be seen. Next up here, we have a tomb which was made as a sign of respect to the different monks that came from various places from around the world to show pilgrimage, where they would come and then end up dying. And so instead of burying them, they put them in these shallow tombs without any mummified coverings, just straight. You could reach out and touch their feet. So they did that as a sign of respect. It may seem gory for some who will say, well, you should bury them, but for them, they buried these monks in these tombs. They placed these monks in these tombs for that particular reason, out of respect. Once we got past the portion of the tomb, it was essentially time to go back to my hotel at the Panoramic View to wash up. There, after washing up, I was to have lunch at the Bet Ababa restaurant, where you can see here they had a little bit of a buna ceremony, where they had the sini cups, and they had the sar, which is the grass that they use to push the aroma of the coffee, which they call buna, into the air so everyone can smell it. It smelled wonderfully. It was fresh crushed Arabica beans, and it was the most tastiest coffee I ever tasted without having to add any sugar. So that was a good experience there to see an actual Ethiopian coffee buna ceremony. After having lunch at the Bet Ababa restaurant, it was back to the Panoramic View Hotel where they served me more coffee, but they decided to have on the menu pancakes, but they call them pancakes. They call them American pancakes, and I didn't really like that particular course at all. It didn't have enough sugar in there. I wasn't used to it. I'm more used to the U.S. style where there's a lot of sugar, butter. So if I was to have that pancake over again, I would decline. Once I got back to my hotel, I decided to do, before I went to do some sightseeing, I decided to put my passport away. Got a little secretive spot that I placed my Ethiopian birr in my passport. I put it behind the mirror for safekeeping, just in case. You never know. So as you can see, there's highlands, great amount of fog, beautiful mountains in the background. It's a sight to see. And this was essentially outside of my hotel room. And once I got outside and went to the dirt, I was able to see even more of the mountainous view. Next up, as we were in the car, we saw a couple of Ethiopian women hard at work with sticks on their back. And it was a humbling sight because these were some of the most beautiful women I've ever seen. And you can see they don't have an ounce of fat on them. They traverse the mountainside, walk up and down the mountain day after day for wood to put on their houses or for firewood. And when I say beautiful, these women were beautiful inside and out. You can see the heat, the amount of weight from the wood that is on their back. And as we drove by, there was no sorrow that you can see on their faces. They were as happy as can be. And I sit back and I wonder, in the United States, where we sit in front of our computers, we're able to just mess with spreadsheets and we're complaining about the littlest things. And these women are out here walking up a mountain with over 60 pounds of wood on their back without even grimacing. And that right there is what can make anyone just look back and reflect on their lives and say, we do not have it that bad. So I applaud you, Ethiopian women, you strong women, you strong Habesha women. Keep up the hard work, and God bless you. And overall, women aren't the only ones that were working. Even the young males were put to work by placing the wood on top of their shoulders and necks. So it's pretty much like a family unit. Next up, we're on our way to the Yemerhan Christos Cave Church, which was a crazy trek, essentially northeast of Lalibela, up the mountain. I definitely lost my breath regardless of the shape that I was in. From here, we see a couple of kids that were hanging out towards the entrance of the cave church. These kids were especially funny because they stopped me and they were asking me questions and they thought I was Michael Jordan. And I asked them, I'm like, do I look like Michael Jordan? And then it was like, ow, ow, which means yes in Amharic. So I just laughed at them and we just had a pretty good time. Gave them some high fives and went on my way. Once we passed them, so you can see there's a bunch of hills, but if you can look really closely up to the top right portion of the photo, you'll see people with white on. Those were people who were the priests that were having pilgrimage at that time. And then from there I took a couple pictures. Okay, I was having a good time seeing all the sights. And next up, we finally make it to the Yemerhan Christos Cave Church, and it was very secluded. And it was just beautiful the way that they put everything together. This particular church was made around the 11th and 12th century, and specifically for the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. And as I mentioned before, it's located about 12 miles north east of Lalibela, but it's made with stone and wood. So that's the only one that I know that was made with stone and wood. The other ones were essentially hewn from virgin rock and stone and volcanic rock. This particular church is notable for its resemblance of the Debre Damo church because of its walls, and it shows a wonderful horizontal pattern. The patrons did a wonderful job with the upkeep of this particular cave church. Yes, you can see some rocks are eroding, but overall it still looks in good shape from the amount of time that it's been around. And also, within the church, there also stands a spot where they consider a holy spot, where they bury the priests and those who were considered high officials behind the cages that you'll see coming up. There are numerous skeletons that are wrapped in reed mats, and the preservation is generally poor, but if you look really hard, you can see a few skulls with the hair on it, nails, different things like that. It's a pretty sight to see. I don't have any words about it, but they consider it a holy spot, and they placed them there for that reason. Here, my tour guide and I decided to stop for an afternoon snack with injera and berberi. That's pretty much It was nice that pretty much anywhere you went, you could find coffee. Coffee was readily available anytime you wanted it. Next, I have a photo of myself and our driver, where we went right back on the road to a market where they sold anything the locals needed. Donkeys, materials for daily living. It was essentially like a massive flea market. Cultures from all over. We had the Muslims, we had the Christians, Oromo, Amharic people who weren't even a part of those particular people that we normally see, but they were also Ethiopians, and they all came from all over for this mass flea market. And it was pretty interesting to see all the different type of people speaking the same language but looking totally different. So if people think that Ethiopians are just look just one way, oh no, there are many types of Ethiopians: dark skin, caramel skin, just brown in general. It's a pretty big mix, but it's nice. It's nice to see that. Here I witnessed the sale and purchase of raw mar. Mar to Ethiopians is the word for honey. They put it in these big jars and they just scoop it out and place it into small containers for sale. That was pretty interesting. But the honey is very, very sweet, very pure. That's some pure honey. That's the purest form I've ever seen it. And the way that they sold it by weight and seemed pretty effective the way they were doing it. And then we see it donkeys, many donkeys. I asked one of them how much the donkeys would cost, and they told me that it was equivalent of 25 US for a donkey. I was like, wow, that is cheap. If I wanted a donkey in the United States, I could not get one for $25. I can tell you that for sure. From there, we were back on the road to view the wonderful countryside, winding roads on the mountains. Our next stop was the church of Bet Gabriel Raphael. This Bet Gabriel Raphael is what they call it. It's located at the entrance of the group of southeastern churches, and it's very impressive because it's a twin church, and it's the only one that is accessible from the top via a rock bridge known as the Way to Heaven. Looking at its architecture and its layout, it's very different to the other churches because it features an irregular floor plan rather than a cross-shaped layout. This has led scholars to think that this may have been a fortified palace rather than a church, from the Aksumite royalty from as early as the 7th century. So it's a very old church, but it's very scary. It's very high. Looking up and then looking down, you can definitely feel like you can fall. There is no gates that are surrounding these particular portions of the church. So you definitely have to take your shoes off before you enter. They have wonderful tapestry, wonderful paintings that as soon as you get in, you'll see people kissing the cross and kissing the walls. So this church is pretty much highly revered among the locals and those who come for pilgrimage. It was amazing to see how people could carve with their hands and simple tools churches out of rock. It's amazing. And then caves within the rocks that leads to other churches. And from there, you can see that there's still some construction, not to construct the church, but more to preserve them. We had to go within tunnels and caves to get to our next church, which is Bet Emanuel. And this was no easy feat. The caves were so narrow, only one person at a time could pass. And you had to contort your body in such a way so that your clothes would not get torn from the jagged edges of the cave. And you definitely had to watch your feet because there was no lighting within these passageways. And I felt so relieved once I got out of this particular cave because you couldn't see anything. And it was hard to breathe because of the altitude. So I was very, very happy. But it was an experience. My shirt got a little dirty from the clay, but it was okay. I definitely carried my water to ensure that I didn't dehydrate on this trip. So next up is Bet Emanuel, which is another underground Orthodox monolithic rock church in Lalibela. So the edifice was built during the Kingdom of Aksum, and it's also part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site. But this Bet Emanuel, House of Emmanuel, is possibly the former royal chapel. So some believe it may or may not be a church. And as you can see here, I am speaking to one of the kas is what they call them, kas, which is the word for sanctified priests. And I was speaking to him, and he didn't really understand me. So I tried to speak in a little Amariña, but I don't think he really understood what I was saying. So, but it was fine. I had a wonderful time trying to speak to them and interact with the locals. And here we see students from other portions of Ethiopia who were on field trip, who would come to the site for pilgrimage and to pray. And I found that pretty interesting because many of the people there were Ethiopians from different parts of the country who have never been there before. And there were a bunch of field trip groups that were there. So that was a sight to see. And looking down, you'll see the different groups. You definitely had to watch your step when you get down from that area. But very beautiful. Very intrinsic. Coming up is the last church I've seen on my tour, which is the church of Bet Abba Libanos, which is Church of Father Libanos. This one is a unique one because it's hewn into a rock face. It is the only one where the roof and the floor remain attached to the strata. Many of the agricultural features, such as the friezes, are essentially oxamite. But curiously, if you see from the outside, the church looks rather large, but when you actually go inside, it's very, very small. So it's very deceptive. The carved corners of its cubic capitals represent angel eyes. I found this church very interesting because throughout the entire tour, my tour guide mentioned different legends that were told throughout the years of how the churches were made. But this one struck me as kind of interesting, and I always remember it because he stated that the legend says that it was constructed in a single night by Lalibela's wife, Mesco Quebra, with a little help from the angels. So I found that kind of interesting. I'm not saying she didn't get help, but they're definitely saying that it was made in one single night with the help of the angels. The entire church, from top to bottom. So, interesting. But I appreciate it. I appreciate all the information that my tour guide bestowed upon me. And this is the blessing and the wonderful part about traveling is that you can see all these different sites and learn all the different legends. You know, not everyone's going to agree with what these legends state, but to me it doesn't matter. I'm just happy to have been there, to hear it from the mouth of an Ethiopian, and to see the different religions from around the world when I do travel. So it was a blessing to hear all of those things. So from there we did a little sightseeing, and then once the sightseeing was over, it was back to the hotel for a good night's rest, and then the next day I was on my way back to Addis Ababa. I found Addis very interesting because the layout and the way that the capital city looked was a total stark difference from what I saw in Lalibela, which was just homegrown agricultural farming, you know, sometimes no electricity, no water. It was very rural. But when you get to Addis, you'll see roads with a countdown at the stoplight. I was amazed by that. I heard from other people that many other countries does the same thing, but why did we not see that in the United States? How come we don't have countdowns at every single stoplight? That would stop so many issues involving road rage where people are honking saying, "Oh, I gotta go, hurry up, go, go, go." But when you see a countdown, you know how long it will take for the light to turn green, and you know how long it would take from the red to be done with. So it was just amazing. Simple technology that we would benefit from in the United States that Addis Ababa has. So you'll be amazed. You just have to travel to see these things. So from there, I was back on the plane on my way to the United States, as you see with my Ethiopian jacket. Pretty much the only souvenirs I got was etan, which is frankincense, and some magnets and keychains, as well as this lovely painting that you see on my wall of this Habesha women. Well, that's it. Thank you for joining me on my tour to Lalibela, Ethiopia. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and ring that bell for future notifications on my future trips. Thank you.